Okay, hello, welcome to the first live stream from Orca Lab's new camera network with explore.org. A very exciting project this summer here at Orca Lab. My name is Megan Hockin Bennett and I am staying here at Craycroft Point, which is Orca Lab's remote video land-based outpost, which is situated not far away from the main Orca Lab base, but it overlooks the Johnston Strait, very far down to the east and all the way up down to the west as well. It's a perfect area really for filming, photographing and keeping track of the northern resident orcas when they're in the area. I'm here for the next hour to answer some questions that have been sent in from viewers, and I'll try and do my best I can on that. A little bit about my background. My background is primarily video filmmaking and photography, so I'm not a scientist and I'm most certainly am not an orca expert, but this is now my third season here in British Columbia, but this is my first season manning Craycroft Point for a long period of time, so it's been an incredibly amazing summer for me here. It's been a huge learning curve, and I've already booked my flight to come back next year, so I'm ready to see how this exciting project develops, and looking forward to doing more live chats next year as well. Paul and Helena, who run Orca Lab, will be doing a live chat very, very soon, so some of the questions, if I can't answer them, or if they're a bit too science-based, I'll make a note of them and we'll move them forward onto Paul and Helena's chat a little bit later, but hopefully I'll be able to answer quite a few. So that's the first one. So the first question is it accurate to label an orca as a killer whale? So the term Orcinus orca, which is the Latin name for the orca, actually translates in English to demon of the underworld, or demon of the deep. So in actual fact the word Orcinus orca is not a particularly pretty name in itself, but here at Orca Lab we don't like to refer to orcas as killer whales because we feel it just gives very negative connotations to the species, ones that are very not true really. These whales are sentient beings, they have incredibly strong family bonds, and in actual fact all animals kill other animals in order to eat and feed their family and survive. So it's very important for us to keep the term orca as a mainstay and not use the word killer whale. It's still used very heavily in the scientific community and also very heavily in the media, but it's just something here at Orca Lab that we choose to avoid as a term. The second question is, I just read a report of toxic algae in Alaskan waters killing some whales. Is there any evidence of it in your area? I think I read an article about this yesterday or a few days ago. I think it's starting to become very heavily linked to rising ocean temperatures and also an increase in something called red tide, which happens around this time of year. As far as any evidence of red tide happening in this area, I haven't seen any this summer at all. I don't think it's something that's very prominent in this area. It usually comes alongside some fishing bans and certain times and areas where you're not allowed to harvest things like mollusks and clams and things like that. In terms of evidence of the whales, in this particular area there's been no evidence of deceased whales showing up on the coast here at the moment. I know the numbers in Alaska have been increasing, and I know that the NOAA Fisheries and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans are starting to look into that. But in terms of here in the Johnston Strait, thank goodness we haven't come across any deceased whales so far this year. Question 3. What other types of marine life should we expect to see while watching these cams? The great thing about these cameras is that they really do cover a huge area. The surface camera here at Craycroft Point covers a very large portion of the Johnston Strait, and down to the east we have another camera that looks over the rubbing beaches. And I think every single camera has a completely different set of animals and a completely different set of personalities, and I think that's one of the really great things about these cameras. Like, for example, right now at the Orca Lab base camera, there's a lot of bird activity going on. So there's a bird called Uni, who is a Glaucus-gull, and she's been returning to Orca Lab for many years now, and she has a particular technique of eating sea urchins by pulling them up off the kelp, and it's just so fascinating to see. And so a lot of the time, if there's nothing going on with the whales, then the camera will most certainly at Orca Lab be following Uni around on her quest for unis, which is the Japanese word for sea urchin. We've also got the sea lions are beginning to haul out at Orca Lab base cam now. And so, I mean, some days there's over 100 hauled out on the rocks, and you can most certainly hear them as well, which is really exciting. CP has a huge amount of sea lion activity right now. We have a local sea lion who's become a good friend called Bear, and he spends a lot of time here at CP, and sea lions are certainly the most curious creatures in this area. They really, you know, they come right up close to the rocks and they really look at you. It's pretty neat. I feel like I've gained some sea lion friends this summer. So there's the sea lions and the bird activity, many more bird activities. There's some amazing groups of phalaropes that are hanging around at the moment. Lots of ducks start to come into the area at this time of year, buffle-headed ducks and harlequin ducks, so that's definitely something to watch out for. The bald eagles are always around at this time of year, so that's also something to watch out for. And another really great thing about this area is not just the orca whales, but the humpback whales. And the humpback whales have only really been spending time here in the Johnstone Strait in large numbers in the last 10 years, and every single year it's increasing, and it's just a really exciting development for this area, and especially also for the whale watchers. It's a really wonderful thing for them to fall back on when there's not as many orca in the area. And these humpback whales are just so fascinating and so wonderful, and over my time here at CP I've been able to identify over 40 different humpback whales, and some of them are here all day, every day. I think this summer my favourite humpback whales probably Domino and Ripple. Domino and Ripple have probably spent the most time around CP, and the way in which we identify the humpback whales as well as the orcas is that by taking photographs of their humpback or their dorsal fin, and the same with the orcas, the big dorsal fin on their back. Every one is very different, like a fingerprint. The orca also have the saddle patch just behind the dorsal fin, and that allows us to identify which whale it is that we're looking at. But with the humpbacks, they also have the backside of their tail fluke has a completely different pattern on it. Some of them are very white, some of them are very black, some of them are somewhere in between. So you can tell just by taking photographs of the flukes as to which individual you're actually looking at, and that's just something that is really neat about this area. We also have lots of smaller cetaceans, Dall's porpoise, harbour porpoise, and Pacific white-sided dolphin as well. So although the orca are primarily what we focus on, there's so much more to look at here and film and take photographs on, and we hope that the audience on Explore can enjoy all these creatures as much as we have this summer. Number 4, can you suggest an online guide for the marine life in this area? I'm not familiar with the fish on the underwater cam. Okay, I'm definitely not an expert when it comes to fish species. I was actually down cleaning the underwater camera yesterday, and the only fish that I can really identify down there are either lingcod or rockfish, and rockfish in this particular area of CP have fishing guidelines on them because they're actually very long-lived fish. They live for quite long numbers of years, so there's fishing guidelines on that. As far as the other fish go, lots of schooling herring, you'll probably see salmon on there as well, and lots of urchins, and hopefully the occasional sea otter and seal, and we've definitely seen sea lions on there, and hopefully in the near future we'll definitely be able to capture orca on that camera as well. There's definitely been times this summer where they've come close enough to be captured on those underwater cameras, so we're looking forward to reviewing all the footage and seeing if we can catch any of them. But in terms of an online guide, there's certainly books available online. I think Dorling Kingsley have a comprehensive guide to all marine life in British Columbia, and I'm certain that that would be available on Amazon for sure. Number 5 is, if not too distracting. Number 5 is, do the orcas mate for life? This particular population, the northern residents, no. The way that the northern residents are split up is that there is approximately 285 whales in the northern resident population, and they are split up into 3 different acoustical clans. We have the A clan, the G clan, and the R clan. And now all these clans can be separated by listening to the calls that they make that we record on our hydrophones, which is an underwater microphone. And so each clan of whales does not share any of the same calls as the other clans. So in actual fact, that helps them to distinguish whether or not they would be a suitable mating partner, based on whether they can replicate any of their calls. So the big fins that you see in these groups of whales, the big 6 foot tall dorsal fins, they're not actually the fathers of the smaller whales in those groups. They're actually the sons and the brothers and the uncles of the other whales in the group. It's a matriarchal society. The female has calves, and those babies stay with them for their whole lives, through most of it. And so the big whales that you see in the groups aren't actually the fathers, they're actually the brothers and the sons, and they stick together for their whole life. So these orca whales do not mate for life. Number 6. About how many orcas on average are there in a pod? How can we learn to identify individual orcas in a pod? I think I covered a little bit of that earlier on, but pods of orcas in the northern resident community can range from 1 whale all the way up to, we have a few matrolines families that have 15, 17 whales in them. So it really varies, and it all depends on the mortality of the group and how successful the offspring have been in terms of ratio of girls and boys and things like that. And so we have 1 matroline that's just 1 whale left, and that's Kaikash, and he is now spending a lot of his time with other matrolines, but left of his matroline he is the only surviving whale, whereas a group, for example, in G clan, like the I-15s, have over 15 whales now, so that's a much bigger family group. So there's a huge amount of variation across the board in the northern residents as to the pod sizes. And in terms of how we identify them, I think here at Orca Lab it's a mixture of 2 things, and the first and foremost would be acoustically. We can hear the sounds of the orca calls under the water using these hydrophones, and very good ears like Helena and Paul and a few interns that have been returning here year after year are fantastic at distinguishing very subtle differences and even the same sounding calls in order to differentiate which pod it is that we're listening to. But on top of that, we can also take video footage, and we can take photographs, and we can look back over these photographs, and by using a catalogue that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada produces every few years, that gives us a really good catalogue with fantastic pictures in it that allow us to sit down and identify individual whales, whether it would be that they have a distinguishing feature on their dorsal fin, like a small nick, or sometimes in some ways large nicks, or some of them have wavy dorsal fins, some of them have a bit of a bend at the top of it. And then other times it's to do with the saddle patch, which is the grey area, the swirly patch just behind the dorsal fin. And sometimes that's open and it has black areas in it, and then sometimes there's scratches and scars and abbreviations that we can use to identify the whales. So it's easy when they come close and you can get really good video and pictures of them, but sometimes you have to go based on matching their acoustics as well. Okay, number 7. What is an orca's primary food source? Will they ever touch the seals we've seen on the cam? Now, interesting thing about this area is there's actually 2 different populations of orca that use this area. Primarily the ones that we've been seeing this summer are the resident orca population, which I've been talking about primarily today, but there's also another type of orca in this area called Biggs orca that are also called transient orcas. And this is a completely different group of whales, and they have a completely different food source to the residents. So the residents prey primarily on salmon, Chinook salmon and chum salmon, whereas the Biggs orca actually prey on marine mammals, so sea lions, harbour seals, common seals, and also porpoises and Pacific white-sided dolphins even. So they have a very different diet. And so when we send out an alert on a cam, it will definitely let you know whether or not it is resident orca or Biggs orcas that we're looking at. So if we've alerted that there are Biggs orcas in the area, then there is always a chance that you might be able to witness a hunt. But with the resident orca, they eat primarily salmon. Okay, how long will the orcas be viewable on explore.org, and where do they migrate to when they leave? This is a question that I definitely can't answer because I don't know where the whales go in the winter, and I think it's actually still a mystery on the whole as to where they go in the winter. And a lot of people have always asked why they don't put tracking devices on the whales, and tracking device is a very invasive thing to do for a whale. If you wanted to place a temporary tracking device on a whale, it wouldn't be too invasive, but that tracking device would probably only last 48 hours. And it would give off some fantastic information, but in terms of finding out where these resident populations spend their winter months, it's more than likely somewhere offshore. But by tagging the whale for a prolonged period of time, it would be an incredibly invasive procedure. The tag would have to be actually physically attached to the whale, so that's not being done, and I don't think it will be done. So it's still a bit of a mystery, but Paul and Helena might be able to shed a little bit more light on that question for you. Is there a time when the orcas are most likely to be active? That's definitely something that we cannot predict in any way. That's one of my favourite things about working with wild animals, is that they're insanely unpredictable. And it's wonderful because it's wonderful to see these whales having the choice to do whatever they want. So sometimes it really there's no rhythm or rhyme to it. They usually begin, the resident whales usually begin to show up in the area sometime between late June and early July. This year it was the 13th of July, I think, that they turned up, which was a year earlier than last year. And they tend to stop using the area late September, but sometimes even towards late October, depending on the size of the chum salmon run that is happening. And so the best times definitely to see them is between late June to late October in the year. But in terms of times of day, that's really something that we definitely can't predict. We have activity 24 hours a day here, so the lab back at the main lab on Hansen Island, the lab runs 24 hours a day, so it's manned by people 24 hours. So night shifts are sometimes the best shifts to take because there's less boat noise in the area, and acoustically the whales might be more active in the evening because there's no boat noise around, and so that's really good. Sometimes night shifts were my favourite shifts back at the lab. Are the orcas endangered, and what is the biggest threats that these orcas face? This is a really interesting question, and it's something that I think about quite a lot. This particular population of orcas, the northern resident orca population, is listed as threatened on the Endangered Species Act. So they're not critically endangered like their distant cousins in the south end of Vancouver Island, the southern residents, but they are definitely threatened. I think the main aspects that threaten the orcas in this population is a huge majority of issues. One thing that I think poses a big threat to them is plastic pollution in the oceans. There's as much as it is very much a wild space out here, and it really does feel like I'm living in the wilderness here. There is also still a lot of plastic debris to be found. We did a beach clean about a month ago on the beach to the side of Craycroft Point, and we collected a huge amount of plastic rubbish on the beach, more so than I actually anticipated we'd find. So I think what most people don't understand is that every single time someone buys something plastic, that piece of plastic will always, forever and ever be that piece of plastic. It never ever biodegrades. It might break down into much smaller filaments, but even when it gets down to microfibers, every single piece of plastic that's ever been made in the whole world still exists today, and a lot of that is in the ocean. And I think the more people begin to ignore it, the bigger threat that it will have to these whales in the long run, and not just the whales, but to the to every animal in this area, the birds and the salmon and all the animals that use this land. Another big threat, I would say, is a combination of overfishing and also salmon farms. And they pose threats to the orcas based on the fact that by overfishing, the salmon populations are getting smaller, and so there is less fish for the whales to eat, essentially. And this isn't also helped by salmon farms in British Columbia. A lot of the salmon that are in these salmon farms have European salmon farm viruses, which is actually transferring into the wild population of salmon, and a lot of salmon are actually dying before they reach their native rivers to spawn, which is becoming a huge issue. So seeing the decline in the salmon runs is a very scary thing for these whales to be facing in the future. Another thing that I think threatens these whales, and not as an immediate threat, but I think as an accumulative threat, is that here at Orca Lab, when we're listening to this network of 6 hydrophones, we're listening to the whales 24 hours a day, but we're also listening to an incredibly large amount of boat noise. And every single year it's increasing, and it's not just a collection of, it's not just recreational use or whale watchers, but it's also, this particular area is a main traffic route for cruise ships, for container ships, for tugboats, for logging tows, and these large ships create hugely large amounts of underwater sound, and it's hard to get used to start with when you're making recordings. It is something that you definitely get used to, but it's definitely something that doesn't become easier to listen to, especially when you're also listening to the whales, because all you can really think about is the fact that they're also listening to this. So what the whales are having to do is they're having to exert far more energy to communicate and to use their echolocation to hunt for their fish because of these loud boat noises, and so they're using more energy. And so they're also doing this in an environment where the fish stocks are declining. So it's two things that are kind of bashing together and really not helping these whales thrive. So that's really concerning for us. And also it's the problem that disturbance through boat noise is not necessarily something that can be measured. Disturbance is a very broad subject. Disturbance is not, there's a big difference between disturbance and harm. And measuring disturbance is something that scientifically you can't really do because it's such a broad subject. And so it's something that the coast is working on. A lot of the hydrophones now are being replaced with calibrated hydrophones, which means that we can actually measure the level of sound that's being admitted into these oceanscapes and really start to put together some projects based on just what it possibly is doing to the whales in terms of physical harm now. Can you talk about captive marine life based on your research? Are you opposed to orcas in captivity? The captive whale and dolphin topic is something that I feel very, very passionate about, and I have done for many, many years now. I definitely don't believe that whales and dolphins should be kept in concrete tanks. For many numbers of reasons, really. I think based on the fact that these whales are highly social creatures and that they spend their whole lives together in these family units, taking one whale out of this family unit and placing them into an environment in which they are forced to socialize with whales that don't speak the same language as them, they don't come from the same area of the world as them. A lot of these whales are genetically separate by over 100,000 years. And so to see tanks that have 4 or 5 different whales in them from all over the world, it just seems like an incredibly unsocial thing to do to such a social creature. And the other thing is that these whales are so, their primary senses there is their hearing, and so to put them in essentially a bathtub, I feel like with their acoustics it's like throwing a ping pong ball into a bathtub. These sounds are just going to bounce back and forth, they're not going to go anywhere, they can't communicate with the other whales that are in their tanks, so they essentially stop using their primary source and they stop communicating, and that's something that I find very, very sad. The health of these whales as well is also a very large issue in captivity. Their teeth are prone to wearing their teeth down through chewing on the sides of the concrete tanks that they're in, and what this causes is that it causes the pulp to be exposed. And what they have to do is they actually have to drill out the teeth and replace it with plastic plugs. And in order to stop the whales from getting septicemia, they have to actually rinse these holes out every day. And it's an incredibly invasive procedure, and it is just totally horrifying. They're also, their food is very, very heavily laced with antibiotics and mood suppressants and all sorts of different drugs, and I find that really, really disturbing. They have to supplement their diets with a huge amount of kind of jelly and ice because the fish that they're eating is very, very dehydrated, and they don't get the water content that they need from these fish, and so I find that very upsetting. The whole aspect of whales and dolphins being in captivity is something that I feel very, very strongly about, and I think it's actually a movement that's becoming increasingly bigger in the Western culture, and I think maybe in 10 or 15 years time the frontier of keeping whales and dolphins in captivity could potentially be a very different thing, based on the kind of barrel rolling of the issue that seems to be growing amongst conservation groups, and the general public seem to be becoming a lot more aware of the negative sides of captivity now, and I think that's a really good thing that's been emerging in the last few years. An interesting thing here in the Johnstone Strait is that one of our whale families, the A23 matroline, there's a whale called Fife A60, and his sister Corky A16 actually still now lives in SeaWorld San Diego, and she has been in captivity for over 40 years now, and she's still in very good health, which is very surprising but also incredibly good news. But we still believe that Corky could be brought back to her home waters of the Johnstone Strait, and if not released, then retired into a sanctuary where she can once again feel the current of the ocean and hear the sounds of her family calling, and once again learn to catch live salmon. And I think that's something that can definitely happen and would be a wonderful, wonderful thing to happen. Okay, next question. Have there been any orcas in the area that have been released from captivity and reconnected with their pods? Not necessarily from captivity from a marine park, but there's one wonderful story from a whale called Springer, A73, and She was born in, I think, 2000, and in 2001 she was found on her own in Seattle. Her mother had died during the winter, and she was found in Seattle in a large humanly populated area. She was very ill, very sick, very skinny, very malnourished, and at first they didn't know who she was, so they put a hydrophone in the water and they sent the recordings up here to Orca Lab, and turns out it was A73 Springer. And so this huge project came together that was a wonderful, wonderful success, in where they managed to get Springer into a salmon farm pen, and they managed to bring her health back up to speed and have her catching wild salmon again, and they took many measures to make sure that she didn't have any interaction with humans. So the pipe that fed the live salmon into the pen was moved every day so that she didn't have a connection to a certain place of where her food was coming from. There was big curtains put up so that she didn't associate humans with food, which was a very good thing to have done. And eventually, when she did get her health back up to speed and they thought that she was ready to be moved, they towed the pen and put her on a boat, and they brought her right the way back up here to Orca Lab, a bay just very, very close to Orca Lab called Dongchong Bay. It's a secluded cove on Hansen Island that looks out into Blackfish Sound, which is a habitat that the northern resident orca population and her close family used a lot. And they settled her in, and they put the hydrophone down, and she seemed very happy, and she was vocalizing. And coincidentally, that same day, her nearest relatives, the A11 matriline, were also in the area, and they came into Blackfish Sound, and the singular whale, Springer, and the family began to vocalize with each other, and the decision was made quite ahead of schedule to drop the net and let this little whale go and see if she would swim off with her family. And she swam out into Blackfish Sound, and her family went south and she went north, which no one really anticipated. But what happened was another group of whales actually met up with her very soon after that and escorted her down to the rubbing beaches, and from there on she has spent a lot of time with the A11 matriline. And in actual fact, in 2013 we received some fantastic news in that at the age of 13, after 10 years of being successfully released into the world, Springer had a baby. And so that was pretty much the best case scenario anyone could ever have thought of. She was successfully released, and now with successfully mating and rearing a baby in the wild, I think it's safe to say that the Springer story could not have been more of a success. And it's definitely something that I think can be adapted to wild whales that are still living in captivity today. Next question. How is the health of the northern resident population currently? Have there been any new babies for the northern residents? Quite a few new babies this year. An interesting thing is that there's some researchers in the area over the last couple of years that have been using drone technology to have a look primarily at the health of whales. And so by using a 6-propeller hexacopter with a camera attached underneath, with a permit from the American and Canadian government to do so, these scientists have been flying the drones over the whales at a height of 100 feet and gathering still pictures and videos of these whales from above, and it's given us a fantastic insight into the health of these whales. And in actual fact, in 2014, last summer, when they first started the project up here, unfortunately they came across quite a few skinny whales, and they were actually able to kind of predict the death of unfortunately 2 whales that didn't make it back this summer, which was really, really sad. But this summer the scientists have been back again doing the same work with the drones, and this year they've been incredibly impressed, and they've actually said that they've found no skinny whales. All the whales have been very plump, very fat, and they've been incredibly happy with all the whales that they've seen. In terms of babies that have been born so far this year, that I know of, at least 3 or 4 new babies that we know of in the northern resident community, which is really, really great news, and very little whales that have not returned, which is also very good news. How many calves will a mother orca give birth to at one time? what is the interval on average. So in the northern resident population, orca whales tend to become sexually mature around the age of somewhere between 12 to 14 will be when they bear their first baby. And so primarily, usually what happens is the first calf of an orca doesn't normally survive, and what happens is when a female whale gives birth to a baby, it actually flushes out all the toxins in its body through the placenta. And so sometimes when a whale gives birth to its first baby, too many toxins are passed on to the baby, and the baby doesn't usually survive more than 6 months. And that's not always the case, but it certainly means that the first whale that's born definitely has the most toxins passed on to it, and so sometimes this does result in the baby dying. But usually the gestation period for these whales is somewhere between 14 and 16 months, and the interval in which they have babies is probably somewhere between 2 and 3 years. Now there's some whales, some matriarchs in this orca population that have had, you know, 6 to 7 calves, and so in their lifetime they can bear a lot of children, and that's something that's really good to know. The population survival rate is quite high for large dolphins. Yeah. When, how, and where do orcas sleep? So I wouldn't say that orcas sleep in the same way that we would, in that they don't shut themselves off completely. I think what happens is they can actually shut down one half of their brain at a time, which is something we can't do. And so more often than not, I wouldn't say that they sleep, but they do rest, and they do this usually very close together. They bunch up in a big group, and they'll surface all at the same time, and we call it what's called a resting line. And that's probably the closest thing to sleep that we'll see orcas do around here. I've read a little about rubbing. Why do orcas do it, and is this a learned behaviour? Now, rubbing is something that is specific to this area of Canada. There's no other population of orcas in the world that we know of that do this social behaviour. And there's a handful of beaches along the Vancouver Island shoreline, and also along the shoreline of Malcolm Island, another smaller island around here. And they have on the beaches very small pebbles of average 1.5 inches in diameter, and they're very smooth pebbles. And so not all the beaches have the same typography as these specific ones. And there's one beach called the Main Rubbing Beach, which Explore actually has a live camera on, and we've seen some incredible sights so far this year. It's so exciting. So the Main Rubbing Beach is actually situated inside the Michael Bigg Ecological Reserve, which is an area of which boat traffic is not allowed, and it was designated through BC Parks as an ecological reserve specifically for the northern resident population of orca, so that they have an area at the opening of the Sitka River, which is a large salmon spawning river, and also the rubbing beaches as well. So it gives the whales some space where they can't be, where they won't be around a lot of boats, and it just gives them that kind of free, protected area where no one can really come in and spend time with them. So the Main Rubbing Beach is actually situated in that. So the fact that we have the camera up there is a really wonderful thing to be able to do. Now what they do is they come into the shallows of the beach, and they actually rub their bellies along the rocks on the bottom. And it's really amazing to watch. The audio that accompanies it with the hydrophone that we have at the rubbing beach is also a really great thing to have in accompaniment with it. The vocalizations that they make are incredibly humorous most of the time as well, when they do rub. So it's something that's very isolated to this area of the world. It's a very interesting thing to watch, and it's a wonderful behaviour. What does orca's skin feel like? I have no idea what an orca's skin feels like, because I've never touched an orca before. I've never touched a whale or dolphin before. We don't touch them here. They don't really come close enough for us to touch, and if they did, we definitely wouldn't be touching them. But I think from based on what their skin looks like, I've always thought that it would feel like ice, like kind of really smooth and kind of silky, but I'm not too sure. Rubbery, I can imagine as well. What has been your most memorable experience filming the orcas and or humpbacks? Oh God, there's so much to choose from this summer. It's been an incredible summer here, and the most incredible thing about land-based whale watching is that it gives you the entire spectrum of filming these whales. So you can film them from very long distances, and what that really does is it gives you a perspective of just how vast the area is that they're travelling in. And I love filming the whales when they're far away and when they're close, because I think it really gives the audience a wonderful perspective into their environment and their habitat and how they're using it. It also puts a little bit of realism into the whole thing, that by doing land-based whale watching, we have to wait for the whales to come to us to have those close encounters. And the fact that it's all completely on their terms and it's something that they're choosing to do is just something that you can't put a price on that. I think land-based whale watching is the best way to see whales and dolphins in the wild by far. It's a wonderful thing to do. But in terms of my favourite moment, with humpbacks, my favourite moment was in August, and Paul had come over to help us with something, and we were tying up the boat on the side, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, these two humpback whales came within, oh, I don't know, about 10 foot of the rocks where all the kelp is, and the kelp was draped all over the side of their backs, and we were clinging onto the back of the rocks because we couldn't believe how close they came. You could feel the blow, you know, coming towards you. It was incredible, and you don't really realise the sheer size of these whales until they come that close. And having a real close look at the skin and the barnacles, and it was incredible. I'll never forget that moment again in a hurry, that's for sure. And as far as the orcas are, for me, seeing Springer this summer was a real highlight with her calf, with her little baby. That was really, really great. She came in for a few days. She spent a lot of time with the A11 matron line, and it was wonderful to see her happy and healthy, and the same with her baby, and just knowing her backstory. And I think for me that was a highlight. The last time I was here 2 summers ago, we didn't see her, and that was the summer we found out she had the baby, but we didn't see her. So to see her again this summer was a real highlight for me. Yeah. Do you have a website where you feature some of your photo sets? Yeah, I do. I have a website on Tumblr that is Megan Hockin Bennett Photography .tumblr.com, and that has a whole bunch of my photos from the last couple of years, not so much from this year because I haven't had a chance so far. We've been so busy to upload stuff, but the best way to see some of my work that I've been doing here this summer is I have a Vimeo account. And if you look up either my full name or Wild Sky Productions into Vimeo, then my account will come up, and that has a really big collection of videos that I've put together so far this summer on behalf of Orca Lab, and you can have a little look at them there. And also the Orca Live Facebook page and the Orca Lab 100 Facebook page showcases my videos as I make them. We release about one a week, one every 2 weeks or so. To the audience, and that's a really great way. The Facebook updates are a really great way to keep in touch with exactly what's going on with the whales, their movements, audio highlights, video highlights, and all the links to the Explore cameras are on the Facebook page as well. So that's a really great thing to keep up with. Also, the Orca Live website as well has great updates on more intricate movements of the whales if you're really interested in the whole picture being brought together. So yeah, that's really great. It would be really wonderful for everyone to check in with the videos and give them a watch and share them away, because it's been incredible to be able to capture all this stuff so far this summer. What sort of info can you gain by listening to orcas on underwater microphones? So recording the sounds of these whales underwater is something that Orca Lab has been doing from the very beginning, in the 1970s when it first started, just with the one hydrophone at Hansen Island. And for me, I think it's a wonderful tool that we can use that we can use in connection with land-based visual work that really allows us to paint a really good image of what the whales are doing without going out on boats and following them around. So in terms of trying to keep up with a non-invasive project, I think hydrophones and land-based observations is really the only way you can do it. And so what we can learn from the hydrophone recordings, a wonderful thing, a project that's been going on for a very long time now, is called Archive. And what we do is we use computer programs to bracket every call. So when we make a recording of whales, what you can actually do is you can turn that recording into an image, and it's called a spectrograph, and it's a black and white grainy image, and it shows the image as a photograph. So different frequencies and different sounds look different. They might have waves in different places. It's hard to explain without showing a picture, I'm realizing. But what we can do from that is we can actually bracket the sounds, and from data sets that were made by scientists in the 1980s and 1990s, we can actually identify not only the name of the call that's being made by the whale, but which group it was that's making it. And so as an ongoing project, by doing this for as many different recordings as we possibly can, eventually what we'd like to be able to do is to actually train a computer into recognizing these sounds and recognizing who is making these sounds. It's a huge project, and it's a long way away from becoming a reality, but every year we get that step closer just by putting in those hours and listening to these recordings, and making notes on different things that we're listening to, things that are out of the ordinary. And yeah, everything that Orca Lab does is in preparation for trying to protect and conserve and educate the future generations to want to protect these habitats for these whales, so that they can continue to use this area, and so that we can continue to study them as well. My dream job is becoming a marine biologist, and watching your cams has given me the motivation to finally start taking classes. What types of classes are the most important to take? Is there any advice you could give me on where to start? First of all, that's great. That's really wonderful that these cameras have given you the drive to want to move into this. My background primarily comes from filmmaking and photography. I actually didn't take biology any further than GCSE level. And so my advice to you is to never stop trying. If you've got passion for something, then you're going to pull through eventually. And so my advice is to take as many classes as possible, anything that is connected to science. And don't just think that biology is just the way forward, because chemistry and physics is just as important when it comes to trying to gain a bigger perspective on the world. And I think ecology is a really wonderful thing to learn. It really puts everything into perspective, and I would just stay focused on the science topics: biology, marine biology, ocean ecology is a wonderful one, genealogy is a really interesting thing to get into, and there's so many different computer software systems these days that are really important to start to wrap your head around from an early age, because science is definitely primarily done on computers these days. Being in the field is wonderful, and collecting all this data is a fantastic thing to do, but you've also got to be willing to spend a good portion of the year sitting behind a computer trying to figure out how to organize the data and put it into a set that's going to give you some answers to the questions that you want to ask. 22. Does Orca Lab offer internships or volunteer opportunities, and what are the qualifications needed? During the summer months, volunteers from all over the world come to Orca Lab to volunteer, and they have done for many years now. They do take volunteers every year. They have a lot, we've got to the point now where a lot of the people that come are actually returning members, people that have come year on year out, and that's really good because it means there's less training involved when it comes to it. But the way I see it is that if you've got a great skill that you think that Orca Lab would be able to utilise, then it doesn't matter whether it's science-based or whether it's, like me, photography-based, or if you're a carpenter, then they'll welcome you with open arms, or an electrician, or any kind of skill-based. Passion drives everything, I think, with these kind of projects. And as long as you've got a skill set to bring to the table that, and an attitude that is going to help Orca Lab achieve their goals year on year out, then it's definitely something that you should thrive to apply for sure. Can you tell us of anything we can do to help make sure the orca population continues to thrive? There's so many things that you can do, and there's so many little things that you can do as well in your general home life, in that start thinking about where your plastics are coming from. When you're going to these supermarkets and you're buying fruits and vegetables that are in plastic packaging, and try and avoid buying as much single-use plastic as possible. Buy yourself a water bottle that you can fill up rather than using single-use plastic water bottles. And really just start to think about your garbage and how much plastic is involved in that. Try and recycle as much as you can possibly recycle. Another thing that you can do is begin to reduce the amount of meat and dairy products that you consume. A lot of the ocean acidification that's happening around the world right now is a direct impact of large-scale animal agriculture, and so reducing the meat and dairy that you have in your diet is not only good for your health, but it's also great for reducing that impact on the oceans. Another thing that you can do is conserve your electricity, turning lights off when they're not needed, switching off appliances, not leaving things on standby, that kind of thing. It's all the same things that a lot of people would say that would help save the earth. But another thing you can do, which is a more direct route, is to start doing your own personal research into things like salmon farming and things like oil and gas exploration projects, things like that. Social media is a wonderful tool these days for sharing campaigns and crowdfunding, and really just kind of spreading the word of different impactful threats that are highlighted in these areas. And then there's also donating money as well is a really, really great way for lots of different organisations to continue to do the work that they do, and especially organisations like Orca Lab that rely heavily on private investors and donators. So even by signing up for $5 a month, you can really, really help Orca Lab just to continue year on year out producing these wonderful films and producing these wonderful images, and in connection with Explore, having these amazing cameras highlighted to a much, much wider audience, which is just a really wonderful thing. How long can an orca hold its breath? That's really interesting. I think they have the capacity to hold their breath for somewhere around 20 minutes, I think I read somewhere. I'm not 100% sure on this, but in terms of we have a lot of different experiences with whales here in this area. Sometimes I've seen the transient whales, I've seen them disappear for up to 10-12 minutes at a time, where you'll see them surface and then you won't see them again for, you know, somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes I've seen before. And with the resident orca population, normally what happens is they'll take a series of sort of 7 to 9 short breaths in which they'll be under the surface for, you know, 7 to 10 seconds, and then they'll actually go down for a deeper dive for maybe somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes is what I'd say on average is what I see. But I think they have the capability of holding their breath for a lot longer than that. When do babies mature into adults? That's really interesting, and the way we classify our reports around here, if we see a group of whales and we're relaying it to a whale watching group or back to the main lab, is that we try and give as much information on the pod as possible. So if we're seeing 7 or 8 whales, another really good way to report on this is by telling everyone the size of the fins that you're seeing. So by looking at a group of 5 or 6 whales, if they've got a very large dorsal fin in there, then you know that there's at least one adult male in the group. Now, the males start to, what we use a term called sprouting, which is when the whales get to sort of an age of somewhere between 12 and 14, their dorsal fin stops looking like a female's dorsal fin and it starts to elongate and grow. And that happens over the course of 5 or 6 years, sometimes longer, before they mature into an adult male, and their fin can reach up to 6 foot in length. Whereas with the females, they don't have that progression. So once a whale starts to get to the age of 13/14, and the either they'll start sprouting and we'll know they're a male, or they'll start having babies and we'll know they're a female. So that's a really good indication for us as to what the sex of the whale is. But as far as sexual maturity goes, it's around 12 to 14, and as far as the male maturity goes, the dorsal fins reach their highest point, I think, of around sort of 20 years old. They won't kind of grow any further than that. Okay, great. So it now says that the hour is coming to a close. So I just want to say thanks very much for everyone to tuning in. I hope that I've given you guys some things to think about. I hope that I've answered some of your questions. It's really great that some of them haven't been so science-based, because I'm not definitely not an expert when it comes to the science of these whales. So thanks for keeping it a little bit more mainstream. I hope that I've answered some of your questions, and that it's giving you a chance to understand the scope of Explore's project with Orca Lab, and I hope that you will continue to watch the cams throughout the winter. There'll always be something going on, even if the whales aren't there, and I look forward to being back here next June, and we'll be doing more live chats direct from Craycroft Point and from Orca Lab. And yeah, thanks very much for tuning in.